The emergence of COVID-19 has forced the legal industry to rapidly undergo a fundamental transformation. I'm Jack Newton, CEO and co-founder of Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal software provider. In each episode of Daily Matters, we'll explore what this new normal means for law firms, how legal professionals can find success while working remotely, and how lawyers can best serve their clients during this unprecedented situation. Today, we welcome Nika Kabiri to the show. Nika is a JD PhD and the founder of Kabiri Consulting, where she leverages data and the power of decision science to help businesses improve. Welcome to the show, Nika.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Nika, first of all, how are you and your family doing?
We're doing great. My family, I'm not married. I don't have kids. So my family really consists of extended family. My parents are in Texas. They're still healthy. My sister and her family are in Austin. They're doing great. And yeah, I'm just hanging in there.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Glad to hear everyone's well. And I'm curious. We're in crazy times with COVID-19. What do you find yourself thinking about the most right now?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because like I said, I don't have anyone, like I don't have family or anything like that. So I spend most of my time thinking like a social scientist, which is what I spend my whole day doing. And I alternate between these really mundane things and then these really kind of dramatic, serious things. So one moment I'll be thinking, just kind of immersed in like, what is our society going to look like in 5 years? And try to wrap my head around that with these big ideas. And then other moments I'm like, why do I even need to wear earrings for this interview? Like, what do earrings even mean anymore?
Right.
Like what, my whole wardrobe is irrelevant now. Like, why did we even have one? And so I start thinking about the social implications and influences that made us do all these things that we don't do anymore. And they weren't necessary. And anyway, that's the sort of stuff that occupies my brain.
Yeah, and it just makes you reassess everything, doesn't it? Just
Totally.
a totally new context to be operating within. So, Nika, I've had the good fortune of working with you over several years now on a variety of research projects at Clio. So I know you well, but I wonder if, for the benefit of our listeners, if you could share us a little bit about your experience, your background, and how you help businesses through the research work you do.
Sure. So I'm really a social scientist. I specialize in decision science, which is the study of human decision making. I got my PhD at the University of Washington in sociology, and while there, I specialized in rational choice theory and game theory and thinking about decision making and the impact of social constraints on that. And then when I graduated from there, I went on to do consumer research and spent the last more than a decade researching consumers and their decision making and helping businesses understand how to influence consumer decisions to get them to buy more or to be brand loyals. So that's what I do now in my consultancy. I do research for clients, but I also do consulting and bringing in, there's a lot of research that's already been done out there by Nobel Prize winners that, like in this book Nudge that I have sitting right here. That could totally help businesses, and nobody's really leveraging it in that way. So clients will come to me and say, hey, should we do even or odd pricing on our new service? And I'll just, I'll advise them, say, depends on what you want to do. And just bring in some behavioral economics or sociology or psychology into it. So that's pretty much me.
Yeah, there's an enormously vast pool of knowledge out there to be leveraged by businesses if they only knew about it, but it's often just a matter of connecting those dots, isn't it?
Totally. It's a matter, the connecting the dots is a skill that's so important. I think it's a really powerful skill. But it's also the case that a lot of these research studies or this academic work that's been done is really not that accessible. It's hard to find, and it's not really well written either. It's almost like you have to it's like lawyers. You have to get trained in lawyer talk in order to know what other lawyers are kind of writing in a contract.
Right.
So I kind of feel like a translator a lot of times. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And translating from the world of academia, where there's a lot of powerful insights, to applied, business knowledge. is a really powerful skill. So Nika, you've worked in the legal industry for years now. You've worked with
Mm-hmm.
Clio over the last few years on research relating to our legal trends report. Prior to that, you worked at Avo.
Yep.
You've had the benefit of seeing both how lawyers act as well as consumers in the legal space. And I'm wondering if you could share, maybe just to set the stage for the rest of our conversation, some insights in general you have about consumer behavior that our listeners might find interesting or even surprising, and in particular legal consumers. Are there aspects of their behavior that you wish more lawyers knew about?
Yeah. So, and I can talk about this in terms of pre-COVID trends, post-COVID trends, and then pre-COVID trends that haven't really changed, um, now that COVID's happened. But I think what a lot of lawyers misunderstand, unfortunately, is that people are people no matter what decisions they're making. So whether
Right,
they're deciding to hire a lawyer or buy a car, they're not going to suddenly be someone different than who they
right,
are. So knowing how consumers make decisions in every aspect of their lives or what they really want can help lawyers understand how they interact with them or how they react to their marketing or their services. And one thing that I feel like lawyers kind of behind on tech as it is anyway, but they're also kind of, from what I've gathered from my research, I don't mean this to be a blanket statement, but they underestimate the ability of consumers to find their own answers, but also the overconfidence that consumers might have, this overconfidence bias that they might have in believing that they can know by just researching online. So they have access to all this information they didn't have, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. And this has given them a sense of empowerment and control,
right.
a feeling of, okay, I know this. Like, what do lawyers do anyway? Like, I can do this. This is easy. Just like self-diagnosing cancer, right? Like, I can do this. Um, and I think lawyers have to contend with that. And I think a lot of lawyers are frustrated. They get frustrated with it, but it's just the way of the world. And that's
Right.
how consumers are
It's the
buying
same dynamic, I
everything.
guess. A consumer walking into a doctor's office, having spent the
Totally.
day on WebMD and saying, "I've got my issue all figured out. Can you just write me the prescription?" It's that kind
Totally.
of dynamic on the legal side that lawyers have to contend with.
Totally. And it's not just professionals. They'll do this when they buy a car. They'll just walk in and say, give me the right price. They know what they want.
Yeah.
Sales, not really important anymore. Um, and sometimes they don't know what they're talking about, but they think they do. And that's what really matters. So that's a really interesting kind of, I think, a kind of a gap in what lawyers think is going on and what consumers are actually doing.
And
Um, yeah.
you mentioned a little bit about the shift maybe in pre-COVID-19
Hmm.
consumer behavior and post-COVID-19 consumer behavior. And I know it's early days. We're 6 weeks or so into the pretty broad-based isolation and social distancing that we've seen in the U.S. and around the world. But are there early signals that you're seeing in terms of how consumer behavior might be shifting, and maybe in particular how businesses, including law firms, might start to think about recalibrating their positioning or messaging or otherwise to cater to those new expectations?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying um, I'm really kind of sick and tired of everyone saying these are times, like this is a time of uncertainty. Like these are times of uncertainty, but they are. As
Yep.
much as I'm really tired of hearing everyone just start their marketing messaging with "in these uncertain times," it can't be more accurate.
Right.
And when times are unpredictable and uncertain, people they kind of, their brain does funky things, and they get people get influenced by social constraints more so than they normally would, and so they're just going to act. I mean, people want a sense of control that they didn't have before, and so they're making decisions either in how they what they buy, like toilet paper, or how they hire a lawyer, in ways that might reflect this high stress need for control, um, kind of experience of being in times of uncertainty. So I think what the COVID world is kind of doing to people is It's kind of putting them into this weird headspace where they can't really know what to do or how to make decisions. So, I mean, it is still early. We see certain trends, but I think it's hard to predict what people are going to do because I think they aren't able to predict what they're going to do. But
And
one
are
thing,
there some North
yeah,
Stars that people are looking for that you think actually span, a crisis, but also, beyond that crisis that are kind of inalienable features of
yeah.
human behavior that we can be talking about here too?
Um, I'll put it in like a decision science framework. I'll come from that angle,
Sure.
which is that in order to make the right choices, like as consumers, as people, as policymakers, as the president, in order to make right choices, you have to have the right information. You have to have some level of certainty over what the outcome might be. And nobody knows anything, and everything is up in the air. So what people end up doing is using mental shortcuts to make their choices, to make their decisions. So broad trends, like I'm not surprised that there's a toilet paper shortage. Like that's not shocking to me. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's panic buying. It's something that happens when things are uncertain. You don't know what's going on. You can't predict what other people are going to do. You might hear rumors, so you don't have adequate information. So even a rational person might overbuy toilet paper in a circumstance like that.
Well,
Um,
especially the first time you go in a store and see bare shelves, I think you see people instantly go into kind of, the lower reptile brain kicks in, and people, that are otherwise completely rational start stockpiling.
Totally. I mean, I don't fault I fault the people who hoard and then try to like sell stuff back, or
Yes.
that
Yeah.
is a little criminal. But yeah, I mean, it's not to me, it's not panic, it's not crazy behavior. So it's like in little instances of that you might see in the COVID pandemic, or you might see in wartime. Like if we had an alien invasion, you would see the same sorts of mental shortcuts happening, not really being able to predict what's going to happen. Um, like looking for, so I wrote this blog post in Medium about this.
Right.
So one thing that people tend to do in times like this is look for connections between things that may not be there. Like what happened in the 1918 flu pandemic? Can we predict what's going to happen to us if we look at that? And what they do is they look for all these similarities, but they really don't look at the differences, because they really want to know and they want to feel the sense of control. So they look for those similarities, they focus on those, and then they draw conclusions about what they think is going to happen without really knowing for sure if it's going to happen. This could lead to self-fulfilling prophecy, this could lead to disappointment, but it's something that people do when they have nothing else to hang on to, just as an example. So, and there's some trends that we see also kind of popping up in legal consumer behavior as well, that reflect what's going on overall.
Yeah. Would love to hear more
So
about that.
yeah, so one thing that we did, so I've been working with Clay over the past couple months to do just really consistent, regular, multiple wave research of consumers and lawyers, so that we can figure out over time during this COVID crisis, like how perceptions have changed, how attitudes have changed, and what people are doing differently. And I think one really remarkable finding from the study, from the consumer side, is how I think it's about 1 in 5 consumers have said that they believe that most lawyers have pretty much stopped practicing law. Like they just aren't practicing law. And and 1 in 5 also say that lawyers are not going to be able to offer quality services to their clients during
Hmm.
this COVID crisis. Now, about twice as many of consumers disagree with that. Like about half believe that lawyers are going to still be around and they're still going to do a good job. But the fact that there's 1 in 5 of them out there kind of losing faith, like the fact that this unpredictability of the universe around COVID is sort of like seeped into them believing there's unpredictability about everything, about lawyers even
Right.
being there, that's pretty
Well,
remarkable
you
to
think
me.
about that for a second. I mean, 1 in 5 doesn't sound like much until you reframe it and say 20% of the market basically just
Mm-hmm,
self-selected out of
mm-hmm.
working with a lawyer before even reaching out to a lawyer. Their default assumption is lawyers have gone home for, the COVID-19 crisis, and there's no point in even reaching out to one.
Yeah, totally. And that's not to say that people that we surveyed don't find lawyers valuable. I mean, about 8 in 10 said that lawyers are essential to our, to our society. But, yeah, if for every 5 people that could be calling your office, there's one that just won't now. It's
Right.
remarkable. Yeah, so there are trends of that pop up too, like this assumption that, oh, well, everything's just kind of messed up, and nothing is gonna be around, and I've lost faith in everything, and yeah, that seems to be happening for some people in the legal
And
profession.
do, as a lawyer, what are you able to do about that? Do you see there being any actionable insights from this research that lawyers can think about how they pivot their behavior to kind of cope in this environment where their prospective clients may be acting in very unpredictable ways, or even if they are predictable thanks to the research that we've done together, maybe it's hard to anticipate how you engineer against that and optimize for it.
Yeah, it's really hard to change the minds of those people. Um, but one thing that is I hate to use the word guarantee, but I'm going to say it, pretty guaranteed these days, is that people are online. And
Yes.
lawyers that are, and these aren't just lawyers that we surveyed, but these are lawyers I personally talked to that are tech forward, that have set up virtual practices. Like I talked to a lawyer not long ago who had a virtual practice before COVID even happened. And that transition for her has been seamless, and she hasn't been seeing any change really in what she's been doing. So I think being out there online, not just marketing online in a classy way these days, which is, I find very rare, but marketing online where people are, because that's where they are, will pick up the clients that are going to be open to you, and might actually change the minds of people who think you're not out there.
Right.
Um, yeah, and that's something else, if you don't mind me just going on with that technology seems to be the big game changer for lawyers coming up. More consumers, more Americans say that they are, I think it's about, I don't know, about half. I don't know the statistics specifically, but they say they're using more technology tools than they had before COVID,
Hmm.
and are more comfortable with tech than they were before. And that they would actually, I think about 7 in 10 say they would prefer to hire a lawyer who could allow them to share documents, not just by email, but through an online portal or an app or a website. Um, and do you remember when we did the research for Legal Trends 2 years ago, and one of the interesting findings was how many people wanted to talk to lawyers in person?
Yes.
Well, now like 6 in 10 say they'd rather, even if they could see a lawyer in person, they'd rather do phone or video.
Yeah,
So
and this
that's,
was I want to spend a minute on that because I think
yeah.
it's such an important finding. If we rewind to the 2018 Legal Trends report, the real theme of that report was the immense chasm that exists between lawyer expectations and consumer expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and lawyers that expect that a client, for example, would be just as happy hearing about their case over a phone call. We heard almost the polar opposite perspective from, it was the almost opposite stack ranking from consumers in terms of I want to meet in person first, and then if not that, then over a phone call, then it kind of go down the list. And it was really interesting seeing this immense disparity between what consumers' expectations were and what lawyers thought those expectations
Right.
would be. But it's also interesting. I don't know if you think about consumer research the same way I think about product management, but one of the things I think about a lot is people will tell you the feature that they want in your software, but what you're actually trying to listen for is what is their pain point,
Totally.
and then engineer the feature around what the true pain point is. And the best most people can do, and it's a natural instinct for all of us, is express that pain point in terms of a feature rather than the underlying pain point. And I think when the catalyst that this COVID-19 opportunity is presenting is an opportunity to kind of innovate and experiment. And when a consumer tells us, I want a face-to-face in-person meeting, and many lawyers think that's untenable, for example, there's no way I can accommodate that many in-person meetings and the logistics and the overlap and everything else that goes along with that, we're now in an era where you can say, well, try out Zoom. Maybe a
Mm-hmm.
Zoom meeting actually creates 90 or 95% or even 100% of what the consumer is looking for in that interaction.
100%, 100%. And, I think one of the most, for me, when I heard you deliver your presentation at that legal trends report in 2018, it still sticks with me. The most powerful thing that you said, in my opinion, was that really what lawyers need to do is really think about product market fit. That they're
Right.
not, they're public servants. Yes, they're doing a public service. That's right. But to think in terms of product market fit will allow lawyers to identify exactly what they need to do as servants, like how they need to serve.
Right.
And that's where the pain point comes in. If the market pain point is what you're trying to fit your product to. So I agree with you 100%. I wish the legal industry thought that way more. I wish court systems thought that way too. I don't
Absolutely.
think the court systems are really doing a good job adjusting. I don't know, but the entire legal industry thinking more in terms of how are the people that you're supposed to serve hurting because you're not tech forward, and how can we
Right.
create solutions for that?
Agree 100%. And if we look back at the research that that we'll be publishing together on this impact of COVID-19 on the legal industry, are there other trends or other key insights that really stood out to you in terms of either lawyer specific findings or findings around how consumer behavior is shifting? You talked a little bit about the shift to new technologies and the willingness to adopt new technology.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that both on the lawyer side, on the consumer side. So it feels like technology will be something really helping weave together a new fabric for how clients and
Yeah.
lawyers work together. Do you see new developments or other interesting insights that will drive the next phase of how lawyers and clients work together?
Yeah. So just to push in on technology just a little more, it was interesting to see cloud technology specifically emerge as something important to both lawyers and
Mm-hmm.
consumers, which is interesting because if we're talking about product market fit, cloud really solves for this consumer pain point or even legal or lawyer problem of unpredictability, which is what we're all dealing with right now. Like when you suddenly unpredictably can't, share a paper document with a client in your office, or you can't run to the office to get a file.
Right.
It just kind of solves for having everything you need right there, no matter what the situation is or where you are. It seems like both lawyers and consumers are starting to recognize needing their data to be someplace that they can access wherever they are from whatever device. Um,
Right.
which I'm not sure that it was as salient to them before, the value
No,
of cloud.
no. And I think the way I've framed it before is I think on the other side of this crisis, people will view increasingly paper documents, on-premise systems of all kind as a liability, because the next crisis that comes along, whether it's a natural disaster
Mm-hmm.
or a pandemic too, it's a huge liability to have something that you cannot have, living in the ether that is the cloud and
Totally.
accessible from anywhere.
And it's interesting that lawyers who resist the cloud say that, well, what if, you know, like there's a virus, or there's
Right.
like, some
The
terrorist
of the
attack that
digital
takes down,
variety.
right? Or that,
Yeah.
digital warfare or digital terrorism, and, everything that I have in the cloud suddenly gets erased. And then I'm kind of screwed, which is unfortunate because that's not quite how it works. But yeah, it's kind of, for some lawyers, it kind of takes a little bit of know and understanding a little bit more to recognize that the risk is greater when, when you have a paper file. Not to mention that people can take it home, lose it, spill coffee
Right.
on it. There's that too. But aside from tech, um, I don't know. I feel like there's some changes that we might be seeing happening in terms of what practice areas might get more or less attention from consumers, like trends in because I think a lot of lawyers are also wondering, like, what's going to happen to my practice. I suspect there are a lot of traffic attorneys right now that are throwing up their hands and going, oh crap, like I chose
Right.
the wrong practice area,
Right.
especially if they're right out of law school and they just started being traffic attorneys. But I think looking at social trends too, you can see sort of how some practice areas are emerging as maybe doing better and others not.
Right. And I
Um,
think we saw, perhaps unsurprisingly, but a huge spike in new matter creation on
bankruptcy.
bankruptcies. And there will be the winners and losers in the
Totally.
practice areas. And I think it's one of the interesting areas. There's some built-in resiliency in legal as a field where, unlike restaurants, for example, that are uniformly depressed in terms of demand, we will see some practice areas see enormous demand, and at least some lawyers that
Mm-hmm.
will be in a position to pivot to those in demand practice areas, which is promising. One area I'd love to dig for a minute on the research, Nika, is around how consumers find lawyers. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something you've again spent a lot of energy over your career looking at, both in your work with Avo and your work with Clio. Tell us a little bit about what that looked like pre COVID-19, and maybe offer us your predictions in terms of how you think this will drive changes in terms of how consumers find lawyers in the future.
Right. So pre-COVID, it was kind of neck and neck, people who would seek referrals first versus people who would just go online and Google or look for a lawyer just by using, their own resources. Um, and I suspect that a lot of people who seek referrals first, and to be honest, we didn't dig into this very much, but I believe that people who seek referrals first are people um, who have social networks that they expect would include lawyers, right?
Right.
So there are certain people who are disadvantaged, perhaps. I think anybody, we all know lawyers because we work at Clio or work with Clio or have a law degree or whatever, but others aren't in that position, so they need to look for other resources. I
Right.
don't think that will change in the post COVID world too much. And the reason for that is that there's and it's again like the pain point, like what's the reason why people are seeking referrals? And it's this unpredictability, this uncertainty, like how do I know this lawyer is going to do right by me? And the best way I can know that is if somebody I know and trust vouches for them. And so the referral is still going to be very important, but it's how they reach that referral that'll probably be different. So it might be less over dinner and maybe more over, oh, I don't know, maybe even a Facebook recommendation. Who knows? Like it could be
Right.
a more digital request or emails or something like that. Um,
And
and
do you think
yeah,
we see a shift away from, how consumers find lawyers feels like this, on average, fairly old-fashioned way of discovering lawyers. It's almost like back in the day when you would travel to a new city and try to find a local and ask for restaurant recommendations, or talk to the concierge at the hotel and get recommendations. People still do that, but to such a small degree compared to the way they did 10
right.
years ago. And now we just jump on Yelp or OpenTable and look at the reviews and trust that as a really strong
Totally.
signal for where the great places to eat are. And yet with lawyers, it still feels like if you want to do a house purchase and need a lawyer to help support that, you're asking the last friend that bought a house for a
Right.
recommendation. And it feels like this almost small town kind of way of finding lawyers. And when that opportunity for a casual conversation goes away, as it has with COVID-19,
hmm
do you think we'll see a shift toward the online reviews and online marketplaces playing a stronger role for how consumers find lawyers?
So I think they've always been strong. Like I think reviews are going to always been and will always be strong. So even people who seek out a referral first, they're going to go online and seek out. Like a friend of mine is going through some family planning issues and did exactly that. Got a couple referrals, looked
Hmm.
online, asked me, "Do I know anyone?" Like people are doing both, and those reviews are going to matter no matter what. Because for a lot of people, those reviews are sort of a kind of a proxy for a referral too. Like they're vouching for this attorney online. It's just, where's that first contact going to come?
Right.
But I think because more people are online, and this is just consumer research I've done across other categories since COVID, not just for the legal category, like people are just online because they're bored, and they're just going to be there more, and they're going to see more stuff. So being there is the way to go.
Yeah, it feels
Yeah.
like if you're kind of leaving this podcast thinking of a few actionable things you can put to work as investments for the COVID-19 era, but also what you might regard as a no regrets investment for the post COVID-19 world, investing in, closing the loop with your clients and asking for online reviews feels like one of those things.
Yep.
Really thinking about how do you pivot your client experience that you're delivering to a tech enabled
Mm-hmm.
fashion of delivering your legal services. So, Zoom and online collaboration portals, electronic payments,
Yep.
that's a
Yep.
big piece of it. Are there other pro tips you'd share, knowing consumer behavior so well that lawyers could start investing in, that again they'd look at as these no regret investments on the other side of the crisis?
So when people are faced in a position of in a times of uncertainty, which we are in, um, they're really kind of hesitant to make a decision. There's this concept called regret theory, and it basically explains why people hesitate to make a choice, not choose the status quo necessarily, but just even choose not to choose. Like, I'm just going to put it off. So if somebody's on the fence about hiring a lawyer, um, they're likely to regret the outcome, and if they're worried about regretting a bad outcome, and that
Right.
regret could stall them. And if they don't know what the outcome could be because the times are uncertain on top of it, that stalling could happen even more. So there are certain tricks that lawyers can do in order to kind of make sure that people make a choice and pull the trigger. And one is, for instance, offering them the option of reversibility. So you can hire me, you can give me a retainer, but at any moment, if you want to, maybe like a free trial kind of thing, like the
Right.
commitment being low, dip your toe in, and I think that's why fixed fee or flat rate services are really important, because they kind of signal a limit to the commitment. They say, this is all you need to put down. And it makes it easier to kind of take that step for someone who's especially looking at losing everything and not having a lot of money and needing to spend on a lawyer. That could help. But also just offering like a couple of options and no more would be also great. I know that lawyers don't often come with like a multiple options, but even when it comes to like handling the case, if you're giving a client advice and you're giving them like, you maybe could even be the first meeting and you're trying to give them a sense of what their case is going to be like, and you give them 10 possible outcomes, it's going to overwhelm them. They're probably going to walk away. Just simplify
Hmm.
things for them a bit. Make things simple so that they can actually make a choice. Does that
Yeah,
help?
it's an
Is
important.
that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Okay.
think it's a really important point. And, not many lawyers think about this, but when you're working with a lead, you're trying to close a sale, really. You're trying to
Yeah.
convert this person to a client. And as we saw in the 2019 Legal Trends report, most law firms are pretty abysmal at everything relating to following up with clients and trying to convert them
Hmm.
to paying customers, to paying clients.
Yeah.
And agree that there's some elements of that are an uphill battle. There's not a natural time pressure. There's not always a natural deadline that is going to force a decision. So thinking about how do you work against that psychology of the tendency, what I'm hearing you say is the anxiety around what the outcome might be actually makes consumers push back the decision to even hire a lawyer that will lead them to that eventual decision and eventual outcome. All the kind of psychological behavior that you should understand, and ways that you can help streamline process, help
Yep.
build empathy for your
Yep.
clients as well, which I think is so key, and speak the same language that they're expecting to hear, understand the situation they're in, and and minimize the paradox of choice that I think many
Yep.
clients feel when they're talking to a lawyer and end up
Yeah.
just throwing up their arms in um, and walking away from the engagement entirely.
Totally.
Really, really important point. Uh,
I
looking to the, sorry, Nika, did you have another comment there?
I just wanted to say something. It was really interesting that you, what you said about it being really about closing a sale. And I think that when, I went through law school, and if you asked me right after I finished law school and was ready to kind of go out and be a lawyer, which I hated doing anyway, but I was kind of, if you told
Right,
me, really, you're just in sales, I would have probably wanted to punch you in the face
right,
because I'd been
right,
like, I went through law school. I'm
right.
not in sales. I'm a lawyer. Don't degrade my profession that
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
But I think there's a misunderstanding about what sales is. And I think there's but kind of sales has gotten a bad rap. Um, it's kind of traditionally been trying to about convincing somebody to purchase something they don't really need or want. And it's like the art of manipulation.
right.
I think we as a culture have moved past that. I think
Yeah, you
consumers
kind
are
of
much more
conjure up this image
savvy.
of the used car salesman that,
Yeah,
is selling you something you don't
totally.
need and don't want, and gouging you while he's at it.
Yeah, but I think we're past that culturally. I mean, that
Agree.
worked. That worked when you didn't have the internet, and the only source of information consumers had to make a purchasing decision came from that salesman. So they were going to say whatever it took to make the sale. And now that salesman can't really operate because you can get online and call bullshit on
Yeah.
that. Am I allowed to swear on this?
It's
You can
yes.
call
This is
bullshit.
a
Okay, this is a swear.
rated mature podcast.
Okay, good. Um, So sales now is not that at all. Sales now is really about understanding the pain point, understanding what they need, and it's a service. It can be a service if you want it to be. And I don't think why I don't see a reason why lawyers can't approach winning over new clients in that way and just saying, what do they need? Trying to understand that, trying to understand the psychology behind what's hanging them up from getting them not what you want them to buy, but what they want and need. And they're saying they want and need, but just aren't going through with. And then making it easier for them. And that's really, that today, that's what sales really is, in my opinion.
Agree.
Good
I
sales.
and it may have offended your younger self as well, but I'd argue making your case to a jury is selling. When you look at the most general definition of selling, I think lawyers are doing a lot of it, just not necessarily all that well when they're looking at bringing on
No,
new business, which is more crucial than it's ever been.
totally.
Uh, Nika, shifting gears a little bit to forward-looking prognostication in terms of what the
Mm.
long-term impacts of COVID-19 might be. We've talked about how lawyers might kind of pivot their behavior to address the immediate crisis, but what do you see some of the lasting impacts if we look out 5+ years and think about how did the COVID-19 crisis really change the legal industry? What do you think that might be?
I think that inertia is like the key word that I think about when I think about how things are going to change. We've been before COVID, the legal industry, society, our society was a body in a certain motion, right? It was going in a certain direction. And then COVID came along and just kind of forced us to go in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our direction now. We are engaging in behavior that's becoming part of our day to day. We're embracing new habits and new rituals that we didn't do before. Like I'm all nice up here. I'm wearing sweats from like that never happened before, but I swear to you, it's going to happen from this point forward for the rest of my life. Way
Yep.
too good. Um, but like there are things that they're becoming part of what we're doing. And even if social restrictions were lifted and we could all just go back to normal tomorrow, just even the short time that we've done what we've been doing has put in our uh, kind of our muscle memory these practices that I don't think will ever change. And one of those is video conferencing. It's
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, we can really work remotely. Like I listened to your pod when you and Dan Lear were talking about how you assumed that just by transitioning to remote work for Cleo would have taken like a month to plan, and then next thing you know you're doing it. Like it's not that big of a deal. It's not that
Right.
hard. And it's actually beneficial in a lot of ways. Like part remote work could be beneficial. And I think we're seeing things that we never saw before that that's now part of our inertia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going
We've,
to
we've
be,
realized things that are, I think there's just thousands and thousands of law firms that are realizing, wow, our teams can work in a
yeah,
distributed fashion. We can leverage distributed cloud-based tools. We can leverage video conferencing, and parts of this are better than what we expected. And I think likewise on the client
totally.
side, I heard the managing partner for um, a large VC firm in the Valley get interviewed by Kara Swisher, and he
Hmm.
was the managing partner for Social Capital. And his comment was he works with a really prominent San Francisco-based law firm, and his comment was, the moment we went to shelter in place, his lawyers continued to deliver him excellent and actually better service
Yep.
than when they were at their big fancy office in downtown San Francisco. And he feels in every way their responsiveness and quality of work has been higher in the COVID-19 crisis. And his comment was, I hope they continue working this way on the other side of the crisis, but also in the fees that they're billing me reflect the fact that maybe they don't need that $1 million a year
Right.
lease in downtown San Francisco. So I think there's what
Yep.
I'm interested to see is what are some of the structural changes in the overhead that law firms
Yep.
need to carry on a fully burdened basis that will get reduced or even eliminated in the post COVID-19 world, that may actually increase access to justice and actually really help
100%.
bridge the gap between consumers and lawyers.
100%. I mean, let's just get real. Like, do I need these earrings? Do you need that office? You know
I
what I
can
mean? Like,
barely see your earrings
I know,
behind
like, it's not
your
even,
headphones.
they're not, and I just did it because it's like, I don't know why. It's like part
Thanks
of what you
for
do.
dressing up for the
You're
podcast, though. I appreciate it.
welcome. It's my, it's the least, it's the first time I put on earrings in weeks, so I might as well.
I changed into
But
a collared shirt, if it
good for
just to
you.
reciprocate the. I was in a t-shirt earlier in the morning. Well, Nika, I've really enjoyed this conversation. There's so much more to explore, and I'm sure we'll do a part two when we've published more of our joint
Yeah.
research around the impacts of COVID-19. It is, I think, one of the most exciting phases of my career to see so much rapid change happening, and in a way that is, obviously negative in some ways, but also very positive in others. And it's such a kind of duality to manage in your mind,
Hmm.
the fact that there's a lot of devastation, a lot of economic impacts, obviously a lot of humanitarian impacts to manage, but also on the plus side, the silver lining, this unbelievable, as you put it, inertia building around change and transformation and people experimenting with new tools. So I'm optimistic we're
Yeah.
actually going to end up in a better place as an industry on this other side of this, and look forward to working with you and sizing up the qualitative and quantitative side of um, that story. So, Nika, to conclude, I'm wondering if you have a main message you'd like to leave our listeners with, speaking to them either as legal professionals
Hmm.
or simply as human beings.
Hmm. Yeah. So, the same sort of influences that push consumers to make bad decisions during times of uncertainty are also, they could impact lawyers as well, because lawyers are people. And I think, if as a lawyer, as an attorney who's facing this unpredictable market, there's a tendency, because you're human, to for your brain to do funky things in making decisions. You might be stressed, wanting control, feeling kind of worried, and your brain's going to make bad choices for you. You're going to be impulsive. You're going to use shortcuts. You're going to make connections between things that aren't there. You're going to act because you feel like you need to do something when doing nothing is better. There's a ton of
Mm-hmm.
things that you can do. And not only that, but you're in a social environment that's going to be pushing and pulling you in different directions that you may not really recognize, or that put you in a bad place. And this is all going to happen under the radar, because that's how humans operate. Like, that's how we are. So my advice would be, just know that this is happening. Just know that this is part of what's going on, um, that it's okay to stop and think twice before you make a choice, whether it's about your practice or your family or whatever it is. It's okay to stop and ask yourself, okay, is this really the right decision for the right reasons?
Mm-hmm.
Or, do I find myself jumping the gun or using my gut too much? Because it's going to happen a lot more than usual. in these uncertain times.
And that self-awareness is more important than ever.
More than ever.
Well, Nika, really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today, and stay healthy out there.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters today, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Bolin, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Clio, please visit clio.com.